Hi, my name is Elizabeth McPherson, and this is my case study for curriculum and evaluation. So, this case study takes place at Triscuit Middle School. The school has experienced some consistently low math and reading state assessment scores, which is resulting in the determination that the school needs to improve the student writing across all content areas. So there's an assistant principal, Kim, who's been teaching and has experience in the language arts and believes she can help the school by providing key insight into the curriculum decisions for writing. So looking a little bit closer at the case study, here's some information about the district and the school. So the Rockford City School District is in a large metropolitan area. So from reading this, I would assume there's probably multiple schools. So Triscuit Middle School is one school. It is 80% African American, 17% white, and 3% other. So you can tell that this is significantly a kind of one sided. It's predominantly African American. The majority of the staff, however, are Caucasian, and they're at a 65% free and reduced lunch. So it does say that they kind of are located on this outer ring of the metropolitan area, so suburb of some sort. The staff, there's 80 teachers and staff for 650 students, and this case study specifically outlines the assistant principal, Kim, and her role at the school. So these are 7th and 8th grade students at Triscuit Middle. It is a mixture of inclusion classrooms and regular education classrooms, and it does kind of specify that there are multiple disabilities in their population. So I would assume with a building of 650 students, there's going to be quite a few students who are on an IEP or getting some sort of modified curriculum in that kind of mixed inclusion classroom. The parents, it states, have pretty low involvement, that there's only about 25% parent involvement in conferences and events. So if we kind of look at this mathematically, so to speak, with 650 students, we're really only getting, about maybe what, 150 parents participating in some of these events. So pretty low. So the current curriculum that the school has is very lecture style. So kids are sitting, teachers are talking, that lecture style. They're doing paper and pencil style assessments. So kind of in this day and age of education, we hear a lot about collaborative learning and project-based learning and all that kind of those kind of buzzwords, and none of that is happening in the school. They're doing these norm reference tests that are coming from textbooks. So again, none of this project-based learning, experimental learning, and none of that. There's not really a lot of opportunity for multicultural learning. And I think this is maybe one of the things that stuck out to me the most. If with such a difference in the cultural backgrounds of the students and the staff, I would think this would need to maybe become more of a priority. They're not really using outside resources to supplement or support their curriculum, and there's very limited differentiation. So it notes that these inclusion classes are not very different than regular education, that content and assessments are not being tailored to students as they maybe need to. So they do some assessment mapping, and they kind of look and try to kind of assess the problem, and they find that there's really not being any space in their curriculum for authentic assessment. Um, they need to really find ways to incorporate this multicultural learning to increase student success. And so they assigned some coaches to facilitate some new block scheduling, some 84-minute classes to really focus on teaching and learning. So kind of when you look at it, what's the problem? What's actually going wrong? So the biggest issue that this school is facing is this low student achievement. Their test scores are very low in both math and reading. Students are performing very poorly, and when they actually dug into these low achievement scores, they're finding that the short answer and the written response questions are getting no points. And they're finding that for a lot of students, they're just not even attempting them. They're not doing them at all. They're just submitting them and getting kind of zeros. So this brings them to kind of think about a planned intervention. So they're going to look at math and reading specifically, focus the attention on how students learn. And this assistant principal, Kim, really believes that the problem does lie in the writing instruction. With her background in English and language arts, she believes that she has the skills to adjust the curriculum. That's not working. So what I see here as some legal and ethical issues, again, probably the biggest legal issue is if these special education students are receiving appropriate support. So it sounds like while there are different classrooms, they're really not all that different. And so, as a special education teacher myself, I see some pretty big legal issues here if students who have IEPs, 504s, any sort of accommodation or modification, if those needs are not being met. And so, especially that can get reflected pretty clearly in state testing if they're, especially not getting the modifications that they're entitled to during testing. Some ethical concerns would be that the course is not aligning with differentiation. Again, even if there's not kids on IEPs, even if it's not legal with a signature and a paperwork, kids need different things. And so ethically, this obligation on the behalf of teachers to maybe be doing better for kids. And then that kind of ethical obligation to provide cultural relevant education. It's just really important that teachers are looking and providing students some relevant and engaging, culturally relevant pieces to their education. So here is my synthesis. State assessment scores at Triscuit Middle are below expectation, which Assistant Principal Kim, with a background in English language arts, believes can be corrected by implementing new writing instruction, practices, and curriculums. So here are the people. Again, we've kind of talked about this, but Kim, she's this 5th-year assistant principal, has a background in English, kind of wants to make a difference. We've got the staff. Seems like they're really needing some instructional support. They're not hitting the mark on this writing piece, maybe the critical thinking piece, and there needs to be more. And obviously they are culturally different from the student body. They probably need some direct kind of professional development and support on how to connect with these students culturally, how to provide some relevant materials in the classroom. The parents have these low performing students. They're just not engaged in their academics. They're not engaged in their kind of school life. And so we've got parents who I would assume want better for their kids, but maybe don't know how to provide it, don't have the resources to be invested in the school like they want to. I think it's easy to assume these parents are just like not involved, but the reality probably is that they don't have the resources or the opportunity to do what probably needs to be done for the students. The community is a larger area. I'm assuming that there'd be some sort of reputation with schools. Typically, in larger metropolitan areas, there's some competition between what suburb you're going to live in and what school your kids are going to go to. It's pretty rare to have a larger community or a larger city and population that doesn't have some sort of kind of reputation battle between their schools. So I would assume that the community has a big piece to play in kind of who's going to move in and what kids are going to go to that school and what reputation it has. So the placement program, again, the middle school with 650 students, predominantly African American, really seeing these low scores. So that the program they have right now is that lecture style, paper, pencil, kind of very little resources. I think this is kind of like the definition of old school kind of instruction. So something to note is that they have decided on some new programming. It's called the Formula for Writing program, and it provides a structured approach to sentence and paragraph building. So they've noted the lack of writing support. They've noted the need for kind of intervention and support. So they've put in this formula writing program in place. So what this allows is all teachers to be on the same page, doing the same thing with the same framework. They were allowed teachers to observe the model lessons. Those teachers that observed how this program should work brought it back to the staff, and they were able to start implementing some daily writing. It was, some in math, some in reading, but kids were writing every day. It gave the students some familiarity with how to write and what to do, probably hopefully some confidence to write when they needed to on an assessment. It really provided that consistency on procedures for teachers. Everyone's going to do this. It was supporting increased cultural diversity by just kind of bringing in some fresh new curriculum, some new ideas, and some with this writing model, it really broadened the resources they were able to use. So it didn't kind of pigeonhole them into one story or one kind of example in a book, but they could bring in their own resources that would kind of invest in that cultural background of the students. And I think a big piece is that they were getting to use rubrics for evaluation. Every teacher was looking at the same kind of expectation and grading model across all students. So Looking at the stakeholders, I do think that there's some potential for damage in the community. Again, there's always room for dissonance in the decision making. Someone might not like the program picked. A teacher might leave because they don't want to have to change their ways, all that kind of stuff. The assistant principal is stepping into more of a position of authority. That is always kind of leaves room for error. What happens when someone steps up to make a change, to make a choice? It can always kind of have some damage if we're not careful. And I think that there could be some distrust by the staff. It's like they've been doing it this way for years. It's kind of maybe low test scores have just kind of become the norm. Who cares? Why should we change it? Why should we trust that something better is going to work? I think that there's a lot of people who have stake in this outcome. The administration, what's going to happen? Are their scores really going to adjust? Are we going to, get funding we need and keep teachers that we want? What's going to happen if we make this big change? The staff obviously has an impact on the outcome. What's going to be required of them? How much new curriculum do they have to learn? How much reteaching? I know that, I'm a 12th year teacher, and I would be kind of frustrated if I had to give up everything I had been doing to restart all over, remake everything and retry everything in terms of lesson plans. So that could be a big piece to the puzzle. And obviously students and families, they want to be a part of a school with some credibility. They want to be knowing that their students are getting what they need. So some additional questions I might ask, again, what professional development was offered to make a change initially? What's the school's academic history? Do we have this long history of poor test scores? Is this relatively new? Kind of where are we at historically? What are we doing for the non-English teachers? Like, I'm a former math teacher, and kind of implementing a new writing program would feel really out of my comfort zone. So what support are we offering those teachers? Were there any other programs considered? And what special education support was considered? Honestly, if I'm looking at the demographics of this school, it's a reality that African Americans are over-identified for special education. So I'm assuming that if 80% of the students are African American, a very large percentage of them have qualified for special education support just because of what I know about the demographics of African Americans being qualified. And I am concerned at what that identification will do for test scores, what those class models are doing to support students, and kind of just, I think there's a lot wrapped up in that piece of the classrooms just really aren't functioning. The kids who need gifted support or maybe higher critical thinking probably aren't getting it. It's probably kind of teaching to the middle, so the kids below are falling and the kids above are falling. And so we're just getting these really poor test scores because we're not instructing high for kids who are high, and we're not instructing at a lower place for kids who are low. So action number one would be nothing. So again, like we just leave it. So this is not rocking the boat. It's probably the easiest choice in the short term. Like we're just going to keep going. Cons is that it obviously continues low test scores. It probably is creating some deterioration in morale, and it probably is making teachers really frustrated to keep getting kind of poor reports back. And I think that that would probably cause teacher turnover. I think in the long term, it would just continue to cause a lot of turmoil. Action two is this directive control. So the principal implements this new writing program. It looks like maybe that's what they had kind of chosen. The plan's assigned. It's taught to teachers through professional development, and that's the expectation. So I think the pro here is that it does take action. Like there's a problem, we need a change. Here's the change, and it does bring room for cultural growth. Again, like we're throwing out what we used to do, and we're putting things in that make more sense. The cons here is that there's little teacher autonomy. It's probably frustrating to staff again to have, years and years under your belt of things you've done what you maybe think are well or things you've been doing, and then have your administration say, nope, not doing it. And then, it does leave some room for administrative control, which can be scary for teachers. Option three would be directive informative. So the principal maybe creates several options, looks through some things, comes up with some options, and the teachers have a voice in how that's selected. So I think some pros here are there is leadership, but it comes with compromise. The principal stepping up, but teachers still have a voice. It promotes future decision making. It's not just here's the hammer and the gavel and this is what we're doing. It honors teachers' input in a really reasonable way. It's not too much leeway, but it's not just asking teachers to do whatever they're told. Um, it understands that there is a decision to be made, and at some point it has to be made. The scores need to improve, the testing needs to be different, and it does involve more stakeholders. I think the cons here are it's probably pretty time consuming, and there could be some pushback. So collaboration is an option. Principal Kim just identifies this need for different options. Teachers get together and talk about what the options are, and they plan and implement accordingly. Again, this establishes leadership through compromise. It encourages collaboration and teacher input, involves all these people. I think cons again here are it's time consuming. And I think what this does is start opening the envelope for some pretty kind of like off base options. I think sometimes teachers mean well, but sometimes we kind of get like way ahead of ourselves and kind of crazy. And I think it's maybe leaves a little bit of room for it to get too big and too outside of what needs to be done. I mean, changes need to be made, but too fast, too much, too big could probably be a train wreck as well. And option 5 is non-directive. So, assistant principal really doesn't give any input on how it has to be handled. Teachers make these plans for themselves. Administration is not providing any unified plans. So I think this could have some teacher empowerment. I'm a teacher. I know what I'm doing. I can help these students. Probably has some buy-in to let teachers keep doing what they've been doing. I think teachers would be happy with that to some extent, to not have to reinvent the wheel or start over with something new. And that can be done immediately. I mean, this is kind of the principal indicates that we need to work harder on assessment. Teachers get to it, and it just kind of happens. There's no training, there's no new materials, anything like that. I think the big cons here are obviously like, I don't think this is going to work. I don't think that level of kind of, hey, like teachers make some plans and fix it. I don't think that's going to work. And I just think ultimately this is a lack of leadership. There's a big problem, not only with test scores, but with cultural relevancy and special education support and inclusion. Like there's just too much to fix to have so many kind of logs in the fire, so to speak. So I think the best option here presented was the directive informative. I think that the assistant principal, Kim, has some obligation to do something. This isn't just a let's raise awareness and talk about it issue like some of the options provide. This is a like, there's a problem and there needs to be a solution. And the reason that you're getting paid to be the principal is to maybe have some of those solutions, in my opinion. I think that it provides those options from a professional viewpoint, but there's some structure to the process. It involves teacher input. Teachers have a voice. They can look at the options. They're not just being told to do something, and there can be a buy-in from that. But it also wraps around back to those ethical responsibilities. This assistant principal now has the opportunity to ensure the ethical concerns are addressed in whatever options she provides to the teachers, and that the classroom structure of this inclusion or non-inclusion can be addressed in some of those options. So the principal and the administration has a lot of control over what those options look like, but ultimately can turn it over to teachers, feeling confident in whatever gets voted on is going to meet the needs of the school. So here's how I would implement this. The first thing I would do is have an immediate review and fact gathering. What is happening in our classrooms? What scores are we getting from classroom data, from classroom tests, from state assessments? What are we good at? What are we bad at? Talk to the teachers, conduct those interviews, and ask what they would want in a program. The next thing I would do is complete that selection and meet with the team of teachers. So look at what curriculum and options is available in writing. There's probably a gazillion, but what's going to meet the specific needs our school has? Find those curriculums based on the data, the teacher interviews, the strengths and weaknesses, and then present those options to maybe some trusted teachers, a smaller group of teachers, more administrators, district staff, maybe language arts district staff. Our district has, English coaches and professional development leaders, things like that. Check and see if what you as a principal think is going to work might actually work. Ask that trusted group of teachers before we really take a vote. So the next step I would do is I'd actually present them for options. So let the teachers look at the material. Here are the 3 programs that we maybe could be looking at to use for writing. Arrange some professional development previews, not the whole thing, but maybe 30-minute presentation, or have these companies come give us their sales pitch and their samples lesson. Let teachers actually try it in the classroom. You might think a program's really good till you have to do it, and then you're like, oop, nope, change my mind. So ask some companies to just have some people there to answer questions. Once you're able to really let teachers see what's going to work, give them that vote, select the program, and then obviously implement. So I would think that with careful consideration of programs, an adequate enough time for teachers to preview these programs, and then an actual vote, you're going to get a lot of teacher buy-in. You're going to get that collaboration to map out the programming. You're going to identify those areas where you can increase cultural relevancy, make it cross-curricular, make it math, make it English, make it science. Practice this in all these, and then review the results. Don't just say, hey, we got something new, I'm sure it's going to be great. Actually see if it's working, and if it's not, make another change. So I think there's a couple outcomes. Obviously, teacher buy-in, it all goes great. It sounds like maybe with this writing program that they did implement, that's what's happening. We get the scores we need, things are looking up. The second option might be some teachers like it, some teachers don't. Obviously, with a vote, you're going to have people who didn't vote for what won. And so maybe the people who got voted for different curriculum aren't going to be happy. They don't want to implement it. They're not implementing it with fidelity. So we get an increase in some scores, but maybe not all. So I think if this option happens, my plan B would be to just continue and support staff, try to pull along those people that are kind of dragging it. I think ultimately this is still a success because we're seeing some improvement, but we want everyone on board. So just keep being encouraging. Find teachers who are doing it well to mentor some of the other teachers who are struggling. The last outcome would be no participation, and I would say that this should not happen if you follow this plan. If there's a teacher voice, there's a teacher vote, there should just not be no participation at all. So here is the standard for this case study. I think this was a good way to look at, how can our future leaders, or myself as a future leader, promote that success of all students through curriculum and instruction, looking at data, looking at assessment, looking at supporting students. So thank you for reviewing my case study.